Chapter 1. The Shadow That Pointed Backward. It was in the chill of an unseasonably gray April morning that the curious affair first reached us at 221 Baker Street, cloaked in both literal and metaphorical fog. I remember the hour distinctly, for I had just returned from an early call at the infirmary near Queen Charlotte's, and my fingers still tingled from the wet cold as I stepped into our sitting room, where Holmes, predictably, was already several layers deep in thought and tobacco smoke. He sat cross-legged upon the Persian rug, not in one of his usual chairs, but rather directly on the floor, his gaze transfixed upon a copper coin that spun silently before him like a compass dial bewitched. An open monograph on the geometry of shadows and an old map of Limehouse lay strewn about him in seemingly chaotic placement. I blinked, my mind still lingering in the antiseptic hallways of the infirmary. The milkman? Pity. He exhaled slowly through his pipe, as if disappointed not in me, but in the laws of physics for being so rigidly predictable. It is an omen, Watson. Before I could muster a response, Mrs. Hudson's soft knock interrupted us. A moment later, she appeared with a small card upon a silver tray. "A gentleman caller," she said. Holmes took the card between two fingers. "Mr." He rose with one fluid motion and motioned toward the door. "Show him up, Mrs." Moments later, a thin man with watery gray eyes, a high collar, and an overabundance of nervous energy entered. He looked barely 30, but the creases around his mouth betrayed sleepless nights and gnawing anxiety. "I must apologize for calling unannounced, mister." "Please," Holmes gestured. "Sit. You are among friends, Mr. Vole." Mr. Vole perched at the very edge of the settee. "It concerns an object in our possession, well, a recent donation technically. A peculiar item catalogued just 3 days ago." Holmes arched an eyebrow. "A relic of unknown origin," Vole continued, "though it was delivered under the pretense of being late Egyptian or perhaps from Carthage. But that is not the mystery. It's absurd, of course, superstition, but 2 of my colleagues have taken ill in ways most baffling. Our night porter claims the shadow of the mirror, if one could call it that, moves independently of any light source. And this morning—" He hesitated. Holmes pressed gently. "This morning, I arrived early. I wanted to observe the mirror myself. The exhibition room was dark, yet I swear to you, there was a shadow moving against the wall." Holmes did not smile, nor did he scoff. Instead, he rose and crossed to the window, peering out into the fog-bound street. "It remains sealed in the display chamber," Vole replied, "but I fear it has already done something." Watson leaned forward. Vole paled. Holmes turned back. "What of the donor?" Vole drew a small envelope from his coat. "No name, only a return address in Highgate. Abandoned houses, impossible shadows."
Holmes' eyes gleamed. "I'm not sure I understand," I said. Holmes smiled faintly. "We are being invited, Watson, not merely to observe a mystery, but to walk backward with it. Someone wishes us to believe a shadow can act with intent." He turned again to Mr. Vole. "The back is solid iron, bolted shut. It hasn't been opened since its arrival." "Then we must, Mr." He crossed the room in 2 strides, throwing open the cabinet beneath his desk. With swift, practiced hands, he retrieved a velvet roll containing a set of fine instruments, glass cutter, magnifier, calipers. "Watson," he said as he straightened, "fetch your coat." Outside, the fog had grown thicker, the street lamps fading into a pale blur as if swallowed by the very shadows we were about to chase. And as we stepped out into the damp morning, I felt an unshakable chill, not from the cold, but from a strange impression that the shadow of this mystery had already passed over us before we'd ever arrived. Chapter 2. The Curator's Warning. The hansom cab trundled steadily through the morning fog, its wheels hissing on damp cobblestones as we journeyed toward the British Museum. Holmes was silent for much of the ride, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, and his eyes half closed, not asleep, but operating in that strange state of internal calculation that I had come to recognize. When I ventured a remark on the curious phrase Mr. Vole had quoted, "The past has already taken what it came for," Holmes merely replied, "Too poetic for lunacy." As the city passed in a haze of shadowed bricks and veiled rooftops, I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of dread that clung to the case. There was something about it, not the mirror itself, nor the illogical behavior of its supposed shadow, but rather the air it had brought with it. A sense of watching, or perhaps being watched by something we couldn't define. Upon arrival at the museum staff entrance, we were ushered swiftly through by a young assistant who seemed no less pale than Mr. Vole. We passed through a long corridor where statues loomed in dim niches, Roman generals, Egyptian priests, and Assyrian kings, all carved in stone, all blind, yet all watching. "The mirror is in the South Antiquities wing," Vole informed us as he joined our procession. Holmes asked without turning. Vole hesitated. "She is not herself. She's not ill, precisely, but withdrawn. She stares at the thing for long periods." Holmes gave a soft chuckle. "A question worth considering." Vole nodded. "Only the address in Highgate." "Yes, he went missing in the middle of a storm. Vanished, without any sign of departure or struggle. Some claimed he went mad, others that he was taken." We reached a large double door made of oaken panels, behind which the wing lay silent and sealed.
Vole unlocked it with a brass key, and the hinges creaked as the doors opened to reveal a room that was curiously dim despite its size. High arched ceilings let in weak light through latticed windows, but most of the space was cast in a haze of amber gloom. Display cases lined the walls, relics from vanished empires, brittle parchments, broken idols, urns, and ancient blades dulled by centuries of waiting. But at the center stood a display unlike the others. Encased in glass and framed in dark wood was the sardonyx mirror. It was roughly oval in shape, perhaps 3 feet tall, its frame adorned with a strange pattern of looping serpents and flame-like etchings that caught the low light in unsettling ways. The surface of the glass was a deep gray-green, not quite reflective, more like polished stone than mirror, but it shimmered faintly as we approached. Holmes said nothing for a long while. He circled it slowly, once clockwise, then counterclockwise. "There are no electric lights in this room," he said suddenly. "No," Vole answered, "only the natural light from the windows." Holmes stepped back and pointed. "Then observe, Watson, the mirror casts no shadow to its rear." I looked, and it was true. Though the other exhibits showed faint outlines, blurs of darkness stretching across the floor or up the walls, there was no such projection behind the mirror. Holmes moved closer and crouched, examining the narrow space between the base of the stand and the floor. Then, with a gloved hand, he traced the edge of the glass, his fingertips brushing the symbols that adorned its frame. "No," said Vole. Holmes nodded. "Wise." At that moment, a sound echoed from the far side of the room, a soft scuff, like a heel brushing stone. We turned as one. A woman stood near the corner, her figure half veiled by one of the support columns. She was tall, with tightly pinned hair and a severe expression. Her eyes, gray as winter water, watched Holmes with unblinking intensity. "Miss Grafton," Vole said, hurrying forward, "you ought to rest. You've been—" "I must remain," she said quietly. "The mirror listens." Holmes approached her slowly, gently. She gave a thin smile. "That someone is lying." There was a silence that settled like dust. Holmes nodded solemnly, then turned to Vole. "Of course," Vole nodded eagerly. Holmes turned back to the mirror. I stared again at its surface. "Nothing," I said, "just my own outline, distorted." "Indeed," Holmes murmured, "it shows only what we expect to see." As we turned to leave, I cast one last glance at the glass. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something, a flicker of a silhouette behind my own, standing just to the left of where I stood. But when I turned, no one was there. The air in the chamber was growing colder, and somewhere, deep within that mirror or beyond it, something waited, something watching.
Chapter 3. The Letters from Highgate. The hours that followed our visit to the British Museum unfolded with an air of quiet urgency, as Holmes immediately set to work examining the documents Mr. Vole had promised. Our sitting room at Baker Street, normally a sanctuary of contemplative silence, was transformed into a cluttered chamber of scattered papers, faded letters, and maps marked with cryptic notes. Mrs. Hudson, with admirable discretion, placed tea upon the table without comment, while Holmes barely glanced up from the mounting pile. "The Hobbiton estate," he muttered, tapping a brittle envelope with his finger. "A house abandoned for over 3 decades, yet it remains the focal point of our mystery." I settled into my chair, pen and notebook at the ready, eager to record whatever developments might emerge. Holmes, as ever, preferred to speak little until he had assembled the pieces within his mind. The first document that captured his attention was a series of letters, handwritten on delicate parchment, yellowed by time and stored in a leather-bound folio. They were correspondence between Lord Hobbiton and an anonymous recipient, discussing matters of import in a cryptic fashion. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the faded ink with remarkable speed. "Interesting," he said. I leaned in closer, though the handwriting was difficult to decipher. The letters hinted at some secret lurking within the estate, something the Lord feared deeply but dared not name outright. Among the papers, Holmes unearthed a surveyor's report, dated shortly before Hobbiton's disappearance. It detailed structural modifications to the manor, hidden rooms, sealed passages, and a peculiar emphasis on the cellar and north wing. He then unfolded a more recent note, typed on a thin sheet of paper, evidently from the sender of the sardonyx mirror. Holmes's eyes narrowed. My curiosity begged for more. "Have you made any deductions, Holmes?" Holmes shook his head. "Not power, Watson, but influence, Watson. Mirrors are more than glass and silver. They are the thresholds of perception." Later that evening, as the gas lamps flickered softly, a knock at the door startled us. Holmes rose, his demeanor suddenly alert. It was a small courier, bearing a sealed envelope embossed with the Hobbiton family crest, a shadowy serpent entwined around a blood-red gem. Holmes broke the seal with deft fingers and withdrew a letter, penned in a hurried hand. I took the paper, scanning the terse words. "If you value your reason and your life, abandon the investigation. The mirror is a beacon to what should remain buried." A chill ran down my spine. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet the tone echoed the anonymous messages we had already encountered. Holmes frowned. The plot thickens. For hours afterward, Holmes sat at the window, gazing out into the London mist as if seeking a phantom beyond sight.
"Watson," he said suddenly, "the key to this riddle lies not in the mirror itself, but in the hands that placed it among the relics of the past." He rose, collecting the letters and notes. "We shall travel to Highgate at first light." I felt the weight of anticipation settle over me, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The case was no longer simply an academic puzzle, but a venture into the unknown, where ancient secrets and modern fears entwined. Before retiring for the night, Holmes returned to his pipe and leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, Watson, have you ever felt the sensation that the past watches you?" I nodded slowly. "Then prepare yourself, for in this case the past is not merely watching." As the gas light dimmed and the city settled into uneasy slumber, I could not help but wonder what shadows awaited us in the empty halls of Hobbiton House, and whether the mystery's final revelation would bring salvation or doom. Chapter 4. The Gathering at Highgate. The journey to Highgate was marked by a persistent drizzle that blurred the city's edges and deepened the shadows beneath the trees lining the road. Holmes, ever the observer, remained silent throughout, his gaze intermittently resting on the rain-streaked window, as if already peering into the past that awaited us. I, by contrast, was restless. The letters we had perused, the ominous warnings, and the unexplained maladies of those at the museum all combined to form a puzzle as elusive as the fog that swirled about our carriage wheels. Upon arrival, we found the Halberton estate looming ahead, a great, Gothic pile of stone and shuttered windows, its silhouette fractured by gables and chimneys like a jagged relic of a forgotten era. Ivy clung to its walls with a stubborn grip, and the grounds, once manicured gardens, were now wild and tangled. The very air here seemed laden with the weight of secrets. Our arrival had been anticipated. Mr. Vole, Miss Grafton, and two other individuals, Mr. Edwin Calloway, the estate's current caretaker, and Dr. Eleanor Forsyth, a respected scholar of ancient artifacts, were gathered in the great hall. Their expressions were as varied as their professions, ranging from cautious curiosity to open apprehension. Holmes's eyes scanned each newcomer with clinical precision, noting the slight tremor in Miss Grafton's hands, the guarded posture of Calloway, and the keen intensity behind Dr. Forsyth's calm gaze. "Thank you all for assembling on such short notice," Holmes began, his voice steady yet commanding. Vole nodded. "There has been unrest since its arrival." Miss Grafton's pale eyes met mine, and the note, sent before the mirror, arrived. Holmes folded his hands. An ominous statement indeed. Dr. Forsyth stepped forward. Lord Halberton was obsessed with the occult, particularly with relics said to bridge time and perception. I exchanged a glance with Holmes.
The phrase was no doubt laced with superstition, yet the consequences we had witnessed suggested something more tangible. Calloway, a stout man with calloused hands, cleared his throat. "I've lived here for 5 years. The house has always had its oddities, creaking floors, cold drafts." Holmes inclined his head. Vole gestured toward a narrow doorway, partially concealed behind a tapestry. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Then we must begin there. As the group prepared to descend, I noticed a subtle tension, unease, mingled with the unspoken question of who among us could be trusted. Holmes's gaze briefly met mine, conveying the weight of the unvoiced suspicion. The air grew colder as we entered the cellar, the faint scent of damp earth and old stone filling the cramped space. Flickering lantern light danced across the walls, revealing rough-hewn passages and iron-bound doors. Our footsteps echoed in the labyrinth beneath the house. Holmes paused before a heavy door, examining the iron lock and the intricate serpent motifs carved into the wood. "This is the gateway," he murmured. With a deft twist of his tools, Holmes unlocked the door, revealing a chamber beyond that was both eerie and mesmerizing. Shelves lined with ancient tomes, artifacts of forgotten cultures, and scattered fragments of broken glass filled the space. At the center stood a pedestal, and upon it another mirror. But this one was smaller, framed in tarnished silver and clouded with age. Its surface rippled faintly, as if disturbed by unseen currents. Holmes approached, studying the reflection. "This is the true threshold mirror," he said softly. Suddenly, a soft gasp echoed behind us. Miss Grafton pointed tremblingly to a folded parchment resting atop a nearby table. Holmes picked it up and unfolded the brittle paper. It was a letter, written in a hurried hand, dated the day before Lord Halberton vanished. The words chilled us all. "The mirror shows what we refuse to see." A silence settled. Holmes's eyes burned with renewed purpose. "Watson," he said, "the past is not merely a memory." Outside, the wind howled through the broken branches, as if the very night was alive with specters. The game was no longer one of shadows and mirrors,
but of secrets buried deep within the stones of Hobbiton House itself. And in that revelation, I knew our investigation had only just begun. Chapter 5. The Red Herring Emerges. The chill of the underground chamber clung to my bones as we ascended the narrow stairs leading back to the grand hall of Hobbiton House. Holmes's mind, I could tell, was already weaving the threads of our discoveries into an intricate tapestry, one whose pattern remained obscured, but no less ominous for its mystery. Our small group had gathered near the fireplace, where the weak flame sputters against the dampness, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock our unease. Mr.
Vole paced nervously, while Miss Grafton, pale and withdrawn, sat silently, her eyes fixed on the flickering light. Before Holmes could speak, the heavy oak door swung open to reveal a tall, sharply dressed man with a hawkish nose and calculating eyes. His entrance was abrupt, as though he had been waiting for an invitation that was long overdue. "Mr. James Craven," Vole announced with a forced calm, "an associate from the British Museum's Security Division." Craven's gaze swept the room with a faint sneer, his presence instantly altering the atmosphere. Holmes, who had regarded the newcomer with measured interest, now fixed him with a cool, assessing stare. "Mr. Craven smirked. "I hear you are delving into matters best left alone." Holmes's lips twitched in a half-smile. Craven's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps, but I deal in facts and results. I came because certain security concerns have arisen. Missing artifacts, breaches of protocol." Vole stepped forward, visibly relieved to have an ally. "Indeed, Mr. Craven, strange occurrences have plagued the exhibit since the mirror's arrival." Holmes remained silent, his gaze flicking between Craven and the assembled group. As the evening wore on, Craven wasted no time asserting himself as the de facto authority on the matter. His demeanor was confident, bordering on arrogant, and he insisted on inspecting every corner of the estate. He questioned each of us with a sharp tongue, his suspicion falling heavily on Miss Grafton, whose nervous demeanor made her an easy target. "You claim the mirror affects you," Craven said to her, voice laced with skepticism. Miss Grafton's eyes flashed with a brief spark of defiance, but she held her silence. Holmes, meanwhile, observed quietly, occasionally interjecting with pointed questions that unsettled Craven more than he cared to admit. Late into the night, a sudden commotion erupted from the East Wing. Craven and Calloway hurried to investigate, leaving the rest of us tense and uncertain. Moments later, Craven returned alone, his expression grim. "A window was forced open," he announced, "a clear sign of foul play." Holmes nodded slowly. I caught the subtle exchange of glances between Holmes and Craven. The tension beneath their polite facades was unmistakable. Holmes mused aloud. The night deepened, and suspicion settled like a heavy fog. Craven's presence, while initially reassuring, now felt like a shadow cast upon our own investigation, a red herring, distracting from the true trail. Holmes retired to his room, where I found him moments later staring out the window, pipe in hand. "Watson," he said quietly, "Craven's arrogance is a mask." I nodded. Holmes smiled thinly. "Precisely." As dawn crept over the horizon, I wondered how many more shadows would emerge before the true shape of this mystery was revealed, and whether any of us would remain untouched by its dark embrace. The game was growing more complex, and the shadow that pointed backward had found a willing accomplice to cast doubt and confusion. Yet Holmes's resolve remained unshaken. "Tomorrow, Watson," he said, "we peel back another layer of deception." And with those words, the hunt resumed, toward truth and whatever darkness awaited beyond. Chapter 6. The Secret Clue. The morning after James Craven's arrival found Baker Street shrouded in the same thick fog that had accompanied us to Highgate.
Holmes and I were seated at our familiar table, strewn with the scattered remnants of our research, when a subtle knock at the door interrupted our contemplation. Mrs. Hudson entered with a small, nondescript envelope. Holmes took it with a raised brow, breaking the seal with his usual deliberation. Holmes's eyes sparkled with interest as he read the enigmatic words aloud. I considered the phrase carefully. Holmes nodded slowly. Indeed. As we prepared to depart for Highgate once more, Holmes's mind was already racing through possible interpretations. The cryptic nature of the note fit neatly with the escalating sense of misdirection enveloping the case. Upon our arrival at the estate, the atmosphere was taut, the tension palpable. Mr. Vole and Miss Grafton awaited us, both showing signs of weariness and unease. Holmes immediately gathered the group in the great hall, his voice steady but imbued with urgency. We have received a clue, vague but significant. Vole frowned. That would be the cellar once again. Holmes countered, eyes gleaming. He turned to Calloway, the caretaker. Calloway hesitated before replying. There was some repair work done on the north wing, some boarded windows and new paneling in the old library. Holmes's interest piqued. Vole shook his head. No, the library was off limits due to structural concerns. We proceeded cautiously toward the north wing, the floorboards creaking underfoot as we entered the dim, dust-choked library. Rows of ancient tomes lined the walls, their leather bindings cracked and faded. Cobwebs hung like veils, and the faint scent of mildew mingled with the stale air. Holmes moved directly to a section of the paneling near a tall window, running his gloved fingers over the wood. The work here is too fresh, too deliberate. He produced a small crowbar from his toolkit, deftly prying at a loose board. With a muffled groan, the panel swung open to reveal a narrow passageway, descending into darkness. The passage was narrow and uneven, lined with damp stone and dust. Our footsteps echoed as we descended, the air growing colder and heavier. After several minutes, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, its walls adorned with strange symbols and faded inscriptions. At the center stood an altar-like stone, upon which rested a small, intricately carved box. Holmes approached and examined it closely. The craftsmanship is unlike anything catalogued in the museum, he remarked. With great care, Holmes opened the box. Inside lay a folded piece of vellum, brittle with age. As he unfolded it, I saw that it was a map, an outline of the estate with marked points and cryptic notations. "Remarkable," Holmes murmured. His finger traced a spot near the cellar where a series of tunnels converged. Suddenly, a faint noise startled us, a soft scraping sound from deeper within the tunnel. We exchanged glances, but found nothing upon investigation. Holmes pocketed the map. This changes everything. As we retraced our steps, Holmes's mind was visibly alight. Watson, this secret clue is the turning point. Outside, the sky was overcast, and the wind whispered through the gnarled branches, as if carrying secrets we were yet to grasp. Returning to the great hall, Holmes gathered the others. We must examine the marked locations with utmost care. That evening, as I sat by the fire, I could not shake the feeling that the house itself was watching, waiting. The game was growing ever more intricate, and the shadows around us were shifting, some hiding truths, others hiding themselves. Holmes, in his quiet moments, admitted only that the mirror's influence extended far beyond its glass surface, touching every corner of the estate and every mind it had encountered. And as the night deepened, I resolved to keep watch, for the shadow pointing backward was not merely a metaphor. It was a living enigma we had yet to decipher. Chapter 7. The Crime Grows Stranger. The morning air at Hawberton House carried a heavier weight than before, as if the very walls had absorbed the secrets of our recent discoveries and now pressed them upon our minds. Holmes and I arrived early, accompanied by Mr. Vole and Miss Grafton, prepared to investigate the newly revealed locations on the mysterious map. The others had remained at the estate, restless and uneasy, their faces betraying the strain of sleepless nights and whispered fears. We began in the cellar, where the converging tunnels noted on the map opened into a dim, cavernous space. Holmes's lantern cast wavering light upon the ancient stones, revealing inscriptions along the walls that seemed to pulse with an age-old warning. As we explored, a sudden muffled sound echoed through the chamber, a sharp scuffle followed by a low, distressed moan. We froze, ears straining. The noise came again, faint but unmistakable. Holmes motioned for silence, signaling us to follow the sound down a narrower passage. Our lanterns illuminated a small, concealed alcove, where we discovered something that made my heart seize. The body of a man slumped against the wall, pale and lifeless. My breath caught. Holmes knelt beside the figure, examining the features carefully. Not dead, unconscious. The man's eyes fluttered open weakly, revealing confusion and fear. He struggled to speak, his voice a hoarse whisper. The shadow, it's alive." Holmes pressed a gloved finger to his wrist.
He suffered some form of paralysis or poisoning. We managed to lift the man and carry him back through the tunnels. Outside, the chill wind seemed to revive him somewhat, and he was soon able to tell his tale between labored breaths. He identified himself as Thomas Redding, a historian recently employed to assist with cataloging artifacts at the museum. Redding's account was unsettling. After the mirror arrived, he explained, there were strange things, whispers in empty rooms, shadows moving against the light. I was assigned to research the Harborton estate. Holmes listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances with Vole and Miss Grafton. Redding hesitated. I thought I heard voices, footsteps, but saw no one. Then a shadow emerged from the wall, moving backward, though no light cast it. Miss Grafton shivered. Holmes rose, his expression grim. This confirms that the mirror's influence has transcended the object itself. As we helped Redding to a room for rest and care, Holmes addressed the group. We face not only deception among the living, but an uncanny force within the very stones of Harborton House. Vole looked shaken. Holmes turned to me. And yet, Watson, it is reason we must apply. Our thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock. The door opened to reveal a breathless messenger bearing a telegram. Holmes took the note and read aloud. Second theft reported at British Museum. A collective gasp filled the room. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The culprit grows bolder. As the weight of the unfolding mystery deepened, I realized that the danger was no longer confined to Harborton House. The shadow that pointed backward stretched far beyond its walls, entangling all who dared to seek its truth. And in that moment, I understood. The case was no longer a mere investigation, but a battle against forces both human and unknown. Holmes's voice cut through the tension. We must act swiftly, Watson. Chapter 8. Holmes tests a theory. The theft of the sardonyx mirror from the British Museum marked a perilous escalation in our already tangled case. Holmes sat in his chair at Baker Street, his eyes narrowing over a spread of maps and notes. The quiet ticking of the mantel clock seemed to synchronize with his deliberate breath, a metronome for the pace of his thoughts. "We are dealing with a calculated adversary, Watson," he murmured. I observed him closely as he began to pace the room, stopping abruptly to fix his gaze on me. Holmes explained his plan, to create a situation that would provoke the culprit into revealing themselves through their reaction. It was a psychological game, a subtle trap laid with words and circumstance. The following afternoon, we returned to Harborton House under the pretense of continuing our examination of the estate's secret passages. The household was tense, the air thick with anticipation and suspicion.
Holmes gathered all present, Mr. Vole, Miss Grafton, Calloway, Dr. Forsyth, and the ever-watchful James Craven in the drawing room. His manner was calm but purposeful, his eyes gleaming with intent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I have reason to believe the sardonyx mirror's disappearance is not merely the act of an opportunist, but part of a deeper design." A murmur rippled through the group. At this, Miss Grafton's composure faltered slightly, a subtle sign noted by Holmes with clinical precision. Holmes's gaze then rested on Calloway. "You, Mr. Calloway, have intimate knowledge of the house's hidden spaces." Calloway shifted uneasily. "There were some modifications to block off a side tunnel near the east wing." Holmes nodded slowly. "I see. And were you acting on orders from Mr. Craven or Mr. Calloway hesitated. "From—" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Thank you." He then addressed the entire company. "To understand the shadow that points backward, one must first observe who fears the light." The group exchanged uncertain glances, but none refused. As we moved toward the passage, Holmes's steps were measured, his demeanor deliberately calm. Yet beneath this exterior lay the cunning of a hunter seeking to corner his prey. Upon reaching the blocked tunnel, Holmes produced his tools and began carefully removing the boards. His actions were slow and deliberate, designed not only to expose the hidden space, but to observe reactions. Miss Grafton's fingers trembled. Calloway's jaw tightened. Craven's eyes flickered with a flicker of something I could not place, anxiety or calculation. Holmes gestured for us to enter the passage, the lantern light revealing dust motes dancing in the stale air. The tunnel led to a small chamber, previously unknown to us, where a crude wooden crate lay half buried beneath debris. Holmes pried open the crate. Inside was the familiar surface of the sardonyx mirror, still intact but smeared with dust and grime. A collective gasp arose. Holmes turned slowly to the company. Craven stepped forward, his voice clipped. Holmes's gaze fixed on him. "And yet, Mr. Craven, you ordered the sealing of this very tunnel, Mr." The room held its breath. Craven's face darkened. Before the situation could escalate, Miss Grafton spoke up, her voice steady despite her earlier distress. "The mirror's influence extends beyond its physical presence." Holmes nodded. As we replaced the boards and left the tunnel, Holmes turned to me. "We have forced a reaction, Watson." Outside, the rain began to fall in steady sheets, as though the heavens mourned the unraveling of secrets. Holmes's mind was already moving ahead, anticipating the next move in this shadowy game. And I knew, with growing certainty, that the culprit would soon make another desperate attempt to silence truth itself. Chapter 9. A second attempt. The culprit strikes again. The atmosphere at Hobberton House had shifted palpably by the next evening. Holmes, Watson, and I were gathered once more in the great hall, the remnants of the day's discoveries scattered upon a battered oak table. The cracked leather-bound map, now marked with new insights, seemed almost to pulse with urgency under the flickering lamplight. Holmes's gaze was sharp, though weariness crept beneath his usual resolute composure. It was nearly midnight when the first sign of that desperation arrived. A sudden crash echoed through the east wing, the sound of shattering glass and heavy footsteps retreating swiftly into the darkness. Instinctively, Holmes and I rose, hearts pounding, and followed the source with Vole close behind. We arrived at the scene to find the shattered remains of a lantern strewn across the floor. The window of the secret tunnel we had uncovered was wide open, its latch forcibly broken. Outside, the cold night air carried with it the faint scent of smoke. Holmes crouched to examine the broken latch and the traces left behind. "This was no mere burglary," he murmured. Miss Grafton appeared pale and shaken. "I feared this would happen." Holmes raised a calm but commanding hand. "We must not allow fear to dominate reason." Our investigation uncovered faint footprints leading from the tunnel toward the stables, where a horse and carriage waited under the cover of darkness. The tracks were muddied and indistinct, but Holmes's keen eyes noted peculiarities. Signs of haste, but also a deliberate attempt to confuse pursuit. Back inside the house, Holmes convened a council. This attack confirms our suspicions. The culprit is aware of our progress and fears discovery. Dr. Forsyth, always the voice of calm, offered measured counsel. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Indeed. That night, Holmes devised a plan to set a trap. He instructed Vole and Calloway to spread word that a valuable artifact was to be moved through the East Wing tunnels under guard. The news was intended to bait the culprit into revealing themselves through action. As darkness deepened, Holmes and I stationed ourselves within the concealed chamber of the tunnels, the faint light of lanterns barely penetrating the oppressive gloom. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing through the stone corridors. Hours passed with no movement, and just as I began to question the plan's efficacy, a faint rustling caught my attention. Shadows shifted beyond the reach of our lamps, and a figure emerged, silent, swift, cloaked in darkness. Holmes's voice was barely a whisper. The figure approached the crate that had once concealed the sardonyx mirror, and I saw a glint of metal, a tool, perhaps a knife or crowbar. Suddenly, Holmes lunged forward, gripping the intruder's arm with a strength I did not expect. The assailant struggled briefly before collapsing into the lantern's glow. A young woman, wild-eyed and breathless. I gasped. Her face was pale but resolute. I had to act. The mirror's power is too great. Holmes regarded her thoughtfully. As we secured the tunnel and sent for aid, Holmes spoke softly to Grafton. Miss Grafton's eyes filled with tears. There are those who would use the mirror to rewrite the past, to conceal sins long buried. The night's events left us shaken but resolute. The culprit had struck again, desperate and dangerous. Yet, through their recklessness, the veil had been lifted further. Holmes looked at me with a weary smile. Watson, the game is nearing its climax. As dawn approached, I realized that the path ahead would demand every ounce of reason, courage, and subtlety we possessed. The shadow had become a storm, and we were caught in its eye. Chapter 10. The true motive begins to surface. The events of the previous night left a restless haze over Harborton House, one that neither sleep nor silence could dispel. As dawn broke, casting muted light over the tangled gardens, Holmes and I convened in the library, poring over every detail gathered thus far. The storm of suspicion had cleared enough to reveal faint outlines of a far deeper, more sinister motive lurking beneath the surface. Holmes's fingers drummed thoughtfully against the map spread across the table. I nodded. But what could be so valuable that it would prompt such deception? The mirror itself? Holmes's eyes glinted. We summoned Mr. Vole and Miss Grafton to assist with the research. Together, we sifted through ancient records, personal diaries, and correspondence from the Harborton Estate archives. Gradually, a portrait emerged, a tangled web of family secrets, betrayals, and long-forgotten grudges. One diary entry, penned in a hurried scrawl, caught Holmes's attention. I fear the sins of my ancestors shall rise again. The mirror is the key, both protector and curse. It binds the past and present in a fragile chain. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Betrayal. That word may unlock more than doors. It may explain why the mirror's shadow points backward. Further examination revealed that a trusted confidant of Lord Harborton, a man named Edward Clavering, had vanished around the same time. Rumors hinted that Clavering was involved in the illicit trade of priceless artifacts, a scandal that, if exposed, could ruin powerful families. Holmes leaned back, folding his hands. The mirror was likely a safeguard, or perhaps a trap, designed to protect or conceal this treachery. I was struck by the implications. Holmes nodded gravely. Precisely. As we discussed, a sudden disturbance interrupted us. A hurried knock followed by the entrance of Calloway, his face pale. "There's been an incident in the West Wing," he said breathlessly. We hurried to the scene. The room was indeed in disarray, drawers left open, documents torn or missing. Holmes examined the inscription with a furrowed brow. He turned to the assembled group. "Our adversary grows bold, Watson." I glanced at Miss Grafton, whose hands trembled but whose eyes burned with quiet resolve.
Holmes's voice was steady. "This is a turning point." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the distant toll of a church bell, a somber reminder that time was slipping through our fingers. As night fell once more, I realized that the shadow that pointed backward was not merely a ghost of history, but a living force, pulling us inexorably toward revelation. Holmes, ever composed, seemed to anticipate the coming storm. "Watson, the game tightens its grip." Chapter 11. The Bait, Holmes' Grand Strategy. The chilling message scrawled on the mirror surface was more than a warning. It was a summons, a beckoning toward a confrontation long awaited. Holmes moved through the halls of Harborton House with measured purpose, each step a calculated advance in a game he alone fully understood. The others sensed it too. The tension thickened, bristling with anticipation. Gathered once more in the great hall, Holmes laid out his plan with a calm precision that masked the intricate stakes involved. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are engaged in a contest of wits with an adversary who wishes to keep the past buried, who fears the light of truth." He turned to Mr. Vole and Miss Grafton. "You two will assist me in executing this stratagem." Vole's brow furrowed. A false message? Holmes's eyes sparkled with resolve. Calculated risks are necessary in pursuit of justice. Over the next day, Holmes orchestrated the dissemination of a fabricated letter, purporting to be from an anonymous ally willing to sell the mirror's secrets. The letter was crafted with careful attention to detail, its language designed to provoke curiosity and greed. It was left where it would be discovered by those with knowledge of the estate's hidden depths. Meanwhile, Holmes and I prepared ourselves for the inevitable response, aware that our quarry was watching and waiting, ready to strike. That evening, as dusk deepened into night, we concealed ourselves within the familiar shadowed tunnel, lanterns casting flickering light upon the ancient stones. The silence was profound, punctuated only by the distant hoot of an owl and the slow drip of water from the walls. Hours passed with no sign, and I began to question the patience required by Holmes's plan. Yet, just as weariness threatened, a faint sound reached our ears, the soft scuffle of footsteps approaching through the darkness. Holmes signaled for silence, his eyes narrowing as a figure emerged into the lantern light. It was James Craven. His expression was tense, but his movements deliberate. He carried a small leather satchel, which he set upon the floor with care. Holmes stepped forward. "Mr. Craven." Craven's jaw tightened. "I will not be outmaneuvered, Holmes." Holmes's gaze was unwavering. "Power, corrupted by fear and secrecy. You have hidden more than artifacts, Mr. Craven." Craven's eyes flashed with defiance. "And what would you have me do?" "Justice demands no less," Holmes replied quietly. The confrontation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Vole and Miss Grafton, who had followed Holmes's instructions and sealed the tunnel's entrances. Craven found himself surrounded, his options dwindling. Holmes advanced calmly, producing a folded parchment from his pocket. "Before your attempt to silence this house further, consider this: evidence recovered from the mirror's concealment and testimonies gathered from all involved." Craven's facade cracked. A bitter smile played upon his lips. "Very well, Holmes." Holmes nodded. As Craven was escorted away, the household exhaled collectively. Miss Grafton's shoulders relaxed, and Vole's expression brightened. Holmes turned to me. "The bait worked, Watson.
Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors upon the worn stone floors. The mirror's shadow no longer hid in silence. It had stepped into the open, and the consequences would soon follow. I understood then that the threads Holmes had so carefully woven were pulling tight, and the revelation awaited just beyond the next turn. Chapter 12. The Moment of Recognition. The early morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Baker Street, casting long shadows across the cluttered table where Holmes and I sat reviewing the latest revelations from Hobbiton House. The events of recent days had shifted the balance, but the final piece of the puzzle still eluded us. A missing fragment hidden in plain sight, concealed beneath layers of deceit and fear. Holmes leaned back, pipe in hand, his eyes distant yet focused. Watson, there comes a moment in every investigation when the mind must cease its wandering and fix upon a single undeniable truth. I studied his face, searching for the glimmer of certainty I had come to trust. He rose and moved to the window, gazing thoughtfully at the bustling street below. Consider, Watson, the nature of the shadow that points backward. Holmes paced slowly, his fingers tracing invisible lines through the air. James Craven was a bold adversary, yet he was but a piece on this intricate board. He turned sharply toward me. Recall Miss Grafton's words about rewriting the past. I nodded slowly, the gravity of his insight settling in. We returned to the Hobbiton estate, where the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Holmes's methodical search led us to a concealed panel behind a bookshelf, where he discovered a hidden compartment containing a small bundle of papers. Unfolding them carefully, Holmes revealed pages torn from the diary, entries that spoke of a conspiracy to smuggle priceless artifacts and silence those who opposed the scheme. The names were veiled in code, but the intent was unmistakable. Suddenly, Holmes's eyes narrowed. He pointed to a ciphered message that, when deciphered, revealed a chilling confession. The betrayal had been orchestrated not by Craven, but by Mr. Vole himself.
Vole's face, as if summoned by Holmes's words, appeared pale and strained. Holmes confronted him gently but firmly. "Mister?" Vole's shoulders sagged. "I did what I thought necessary." Holmes shook his head slowly. "Truth, Mr. Vole, is a shadow that points backward and forward alike." As Vole confessed his role in the concealment and manipulation surrounding the mirror, the weight of his actions filled the room. Miss Grafton stepped forward, her voice steady. "It is the past that binds us, but also the present we choose." Holmes turned to me with a faint smile. "Watson, the missing piece has been found." Outside, the world continued unaware, but within Hobbiton House, the shadows had finally begun to yield their secrets. As the day waned, I reflected on the nature of truth and memory, how the past, like a shadow, may stretch backward, but also casts a light forward, illuminating the path toward justice. Holmes, ever composed, had once again unraveled the mystery with a clarity born of tireless observation and unerring logic. And as the final curtain drew near, I knew the game was far from over, but its end was now unmistakably within reach. Chapter 13. The Final Attempt to Escape. The revelation of Mr. Vole's involvement sent ripples through the household of Hobbiton House like a stone cast into still water, disturbing hidden currents and exposing submerged truths. Yet, even as the veil of secrecy lifted, the shadows clung tightly to the estate, refusing to release their grip so easily. Though the past had been unveiled with startling clarity, the present threatened to unravel in a flurry of fear and desperation. The evening settled in with a palpable tension that seemed to saturate the very air we breathed. Holmes and I remained vigilant, fully aware that those ensnared by guilt often become reckless, driven by a desperate need to escape the consequences they face.
Miss Grafton, who had grown steadier in demeanor through the ordeal, bore the weight of recent disclosures visibly, her composed exterior occasionally cracking under the strain of secrets and betrayal. Shortly after nightfall, the fragile calm was shattered by a sudden commotion. A piercing cry, sharp and urgent, echoed from the east wing, followed by the rapid pounding of hurried footsteps racing down the polished corridors. Holmes and I sprang to our feet, lanterns in hand, casting wavering light upon the worn tapestries and gleaming floors as we raced toward the source. Upon arrival, we found Miss Grafton standing at the door to her chamber, pale and trembling as if a sudden chill had seized her. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, laden with dread. "He's gone," she said. "Mister?" Holmes's expression tightened instantly, his gaze sharp with inquiry. "A satchel," she replied, clutching her hands together, "filled with documents, papers that could implicate others, or perhaps offer absolution to some."
Holmes wasted no time. With commanding authority, he dispatched Calloway, the loyal caretaker, to secure the estate's gates and send urgent word to Scotland Yard. Meanwhile, Holmes, Miss Grafton, and I set off in pursuit through the sprawling grounds, the night air sharp and biting against our skin. A dense fog had rolled in, thickening as we advanced, swallowing the familiar contours of the land and muffling our footsteps. We followed faint, nearly imperceptible tracks pressed into the muddy earth. Holmes moved with a practiced swiftness, his eyes keenly attuned to the subtlest signs. A broken twig here, a displaced stone there, a scuffed leaf marking the path of flight. As we neared the boundary of the property, the faint clatter of hooves echoed faintly through the mist. Holmes signaled for silence, his stance rigid and alert. Ahead, silhouetted against the pale, ghostly light of the moon, a solitary figure mounted a horse, preparing to make his escape. "Holmes!" commanded, stepping decisively into the clearing, his voice cutting through the night's stillness. The rider hesitated briefly, startled but undeterred, urging the horse forward with desperation. Holmes, undaunted, sprang forward with surprising agility, grasping the reins with practiced strength. A brief struggle ensued. The rider fought fiercely, but was no match for Holmes's unyielding grip. The man was wrestled to the ground, exhausted, cornered, and defeated. "Mr." Panting heavily, Vole looked up, his eyes clouded with a mixture of regret, desperation, and something darker, perhaps fear of what lay ahead. "You don't understand," he rasped. Holmes shook his head slowly, the lines of judgment and sympathy both etched upon his face. "Secrets kept in shadows grow poisonous, Mr. Vole." We bound Vole's hands with firm but respectful care and began the slow journey back to the estate. Along the way, he began to confess in fragmented whispers, snatches of a larger conspiracy involving others who feared exposure, powerful forces reaching beyond our immediate grasp. The network of deceit was broader, more dangerous than we had yet imagined. Back inside Hobbiton House, Holmes convened the household once again. His voice bore the gravity of finality. This flight was a last desperate attempt to escape justice. Moments later, Inspector Lestrade arrived, summoned promptly by the message Calloway had dispatched. The inspector came accompanied by a contingent of officers prepared to take Vole into custody. His respect for Holmes's deduction was evident in the careful way he listened to the recounted events, his eyes flickering with acknowledgment of the complexity and depth of the case. As the first light of dawn crept slowly over the horizon, casting a soft glow upon the sprawling estate, the atmosphere within Hobbiton House felt lighter, as though the morning sun had begun to burn away the lingering darkness that had held the estate captive. Holmes turned to me, his expression one of quiet satisfaction, yet tinged with the inexorable anticipation of what was still to come. "The game nears its conclusion, Watson.
Yet beneath his calm and confident exterior, I perceived an unspoken readiness for the climax still to unfold. For in mysteries such as this, even the final attempt to escape is but a prelude to the ultimate revelation, the unveiling of truths too long concealed. And as the estate settled into an uneasy peace, the shadow that had pointed backward throughout our investigation poised itself to be fully unmasked, its secrets laid bare at last under the relentless scrutiny of reason and justice. Chapter 14. Holmes closes in, the final clue revealed. The weight of the night's grim events still hung heavy in the air as Holmes and I returned once more to the great hall of Harborton House. Dawn had begun its slow, pale creep through the tall, narrow windows, casting elongated shafts of soft light across the ancient oak floor. Though the capture of Mr. Vole had brought a measure of relief to the household, I could sense that the very heart of the case, the one final piece essential to fully unraveling the mystery, remained stubbornly veiled, elusive as a whisper in the shadows. Holmes himself seemed to carry this weight more than any of us. He settled into his favorite armchair near the hearth, his eyes fixated on the flickering flames, as though drawing patterns from the dancing tongues of fire. Yet beneath the serene exterior, his mind was clearly elsewhere, churning and racing toward some profound insight. I watched him closely, waiting patiently for the moment when his thoughts would crystallize into that rare and brilliant clarity that had time and again solved the seemingly insoluble. "Watson," he began, his voice low, steady, and measured, "all the clues we have collected, all the confessions and revelations, have guided us toward a single inevitable conclusion." Leaning forward, I urged, "What is it, Holmes?" Holmes unfolded a sheet of aged parchment, yellowed and brittle at the edges. "Here," he said, "is an inventory list, recently recovered from the Harborton archives among the documents Mr. Vole attempted to abscond with. It catalogs the contents of the secret chambers beneath the estate." I frowned in confusion. How could that be? Holmes tapped the parchment thoughtfully with a slender finger. "Precisely the point. No one, to my knowledge, has mentioned this locket." Rising with a quiet determination, Holmes moved to a side cabinet and withdrew a delicate velvet pouch. From within, he extracted an ornate locket, its surface intricately engraved with the Harborton family crest. A serpent entwined around a flame, the emblem recurring throughout the estate's history. We gathered closely around the heavy oak table as Holmes carefully opened the locket. Inside, there was a miniature painting, exquisitely rendered, a portrait of a woman with striking, resolute eyes. Accompanying the portrait was a folded note penned in a delicate, spidery hand, its ink faded by time. Holmes read the inscription aloud, his voice steady but imbued with reverence. "To those who seek the truth, the mirror is but a veil. The legacy lies not in glass, but in blood and memory." Miss Grafton, who had quietly joined our circle, gasped softly at the words. Holmes turned his gaze toward her. Her eyes glistened with tears, and she nodded slowly. "It is my great-grandmother, Lady Eleanor." Holmes inclined his head gravely. He addressed the assembled company, his voice growing firm. "The shadow that points backward is the burden of history, of betrayals and sins long hidden." With meticulous care, Holmes began to lay out a timeline of events, revealing how greed, fear, and desperation had intertwined over decades to shape the present mystery. He spoke of the betrayal of Edward Clavering, the concealment of the artifacts, the efforts to silence witnesses, and the desperate acts committed to preserve the illusion of honor. As the soft morning light brightened the room, the disparate pieces finally fell into place with undeniable clarity. The mirror, the stolen relics, the fractured alliances, all were threads woven tightly into a tapestry of legacy and secrecy that had bound Harborton House in its dark embrace. Holmes's voice softened to a contemplative tone. This case is not merely a matter of theft or deception. I glanced at Holmes, marveling once again at his ability to transform scattered, cryptic clues into a coherent whole. "We must now prepare for the final gathering," Holmes said, his eyes flashing with resolve. Outside, the world stirred awake, utterly unaware of the profound weight lifted from Hobbiton House. Birds sang, dew glistened on the tangled branches, and London's distant hum resumed its daily cadence, indifferent to the secrets that had just been unveiled. Within the ancient walls, however, the shadow that had pointed backward was finally revealed, its secrets exposed in the steady light of reason and truth. The long night of mystery had begun to wane, and the dawn of justice was at hand. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. The day of reckoning dawned under a heavy sky that seemed to press down upon Hobbiton House with a weight as palpable as the secret it bore. A thick, oppressive stillness enveloped the ancient estate, settling into the very stones of the great hall, as if the house itself awaited the unveiling of truths long concealed. The once fractured household, torn apart by suspicion and fear, was now drawn together by an invisible thread, the gravity of impending revelation marking every face. Flickering candlelight from wrought iron sconces cast long, wavering shadows across the high vaulted ceilings and dark-paneled walls. The flames dance, a faint echo of the unrest that simmered beneath the surface.
The shadows clung stubbornly to the corners, like specters unwilling to be banished, mirroring the apprehension that gripped those present. At the head of the room stood Sherlock Holmes, his posture both commanding and composed, a figure of resolute calm amidst the tension. Beside him, Inspector Lestrade surveyed the assembly with a professional solemnity that bespoke the seriousness of the occasion. Among those gathered were the key players in this unfolding drama. Mr. Percy Vole, now subdued but bearing the weight of responsibility with quiet dignity. Miss Eleanor Grafton, her inner strength visibly renewed by the liberating power of truth. Dr. Eleanor Forsyth, steady and watchful. Calloway, the steadfast caretaker who had borne witness to the estate's shifting shadows, and the remaining staff, whose faces revealed a mixture of relief, anxiety, and cautious hope. The air was taut with expectancy, thick enough to be cut by a whisper, as Holmes began to speak, his voice resonant yet measured. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we are gathered here not merely to recount a sequence of events, but to confront the very essence of truth, often obscured and twisted by shadows born of fear, greed, and misguided loyalty. The case of the sardonyx mirror is as much a study of human frailty as it is a tale of artifacts and deception." Holmes's gaze swept the room slowly, eyes piercing yet compassionate. The mirror itself is but an instrument, a catalyst revealing hidden motives and ancient secrets long buried beneath layers of silence. Turning sharply, he faced Mr. Vole directly. "You, Mr. Vole, endeavored to protect a legacy, but it was a legacy built on deception and silence." Vole's expression was somber, the burden of his actions plainly visible. "I acted out of fear," he confessed softly. "The truth would have destroyed families, ruined reputations, and shattered entire lives." Holmes nodded gravely. "Yet, in doing so, you invited chaos. Secrets, mister." Shifting his attention to Miss Grafton, Holmes continued. "You have borne witness to the mirror's insidious influence, and your courage in revealing the locket's significance has been invaluable." Miss Grafton inclined her head in acknowledgment, her eyes steady, reflecting both sorrow and resolve. Holmes then addressed the broader assembly, his voice softening yet retaining its commanding presence. "Each person here has been touched by this story, whether by knowledge, suspicion, silence, or courage."
A profound hush fell over the room as Holmes drew from his pocket a folded bundle of documents. The deciphered diary entries, coded letters, and meticulous inventories that had unraveled the conspiracy piece by piece. With clarity born of relentless scrutiny, he recounted, step by step, the sequence of events. Lord Hobbiton's escalating fears, the treachery of Edward Clavering, the deliberate concealment of priceless artifacts, and the desperate acts committed to hide these truths from the world.
Inspector Lestrade listened intently, his expression grave and thoughtful. When Holmes finished, he nodded with solemnity. "The evidence you have presented is overwhelming." Holmes offered a faint, satisfied smile. As the assembly slowly dispersed, quiet conversations replaced the earlier tension, thoughtful murmurs weaving hope among the residual doubts. Miss Grafton approached Holmes and me, her voice gentle but resolute. Holmes placed a reassuring hand upon her shoulder. Later that evening, as the twilight deepened and the city lights blinked to life, Holmes and I sat by the fire in our Baker Street sitting room. The mystery finally laid bare before us. The crackling flames painted dancing patterns upon the walls, shadows now softer, less threatening. Holmes exhaled slowly, eyes reflecting the flickering light. "The shadow that pointed backward has been confronted and diminished, Watson." I nodded thoughtfully, contemplating the intricate web we had unraveled, the fragile human stories hidden beneath the cold facts. Holmes smiled quietly, a rare softness touching his features. "Tomorrow, justice will be carried out." And as the night deepened around us, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a case well solved, the comfort that, no matter the darkness, the pursuit of truth must follow wherever shadows fall. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Holmes breaks down the crime. The great hall at Hobbiton House was heavy with anticipation, transformed into a solemn chamber where the past's secrets would finally face the light of day. The assembled company sat quietly, their faces a mixture of apprehension, relief, and exhaustion, each awaiting Holmes's revolution with bated breath. The flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows that seemed to dance in uneasy rhythm with the unfolding drama. Holmes stood tall before the crowd, his posture commanding but not overbearing, every eye drawn to him by the quiet authority that always accompanied his voice. His manner was deliberate, measured, a master preparing to reveal the final stroke in a masterpiece of deduction. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have traveled a winding path, through layers of deception, betrayal, and fear, only to arrive at a truth more complex than any one of us could have anticipated." He gestured toward the sprawling map and scattered documents laid upon the table, their significance now crystal clear. Holmes turned his gaze slowly to Mr. Vole. "You, Mr. Vole, were entrusted with this secret." Vole's head bowed slightly in acknowledgement, the weight of his choices etched deeply upon his features. "But," Holmes continued, "the truth is a persistent force, and silence is rarely a sanctuary." Holmes reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the ornate locket, placing it reverently upon the table. This locket, concealed within the mirror's frame, carries the emblem of the Hobbiton legacy. Inside rests the portrait of Lady Eleanor, a woman whose story was all but erased by those seeking to protect their own ambitions. The shadow that pointed backward is more than metaphor. He turned to Miss Grafton, who met his gaze with resolute strength. Holmes then addressed the entire assembly. "Each one of you stands here touched by this story, whether by knowledge, silence, or suspicion." He paused, drawing a deep breath before unfolding the final tapestry. The diary of Lord Hobbiton, along with letters and coded documents recovered, reveal a chilling conspiracy. Edward Clavering, a trusted confidant, betrayed the family, engaging in illicit trafficking of artifacts and orchestrating schemes to silence dissenters. Holmes's voice hardened slightly. "Mr. Vole, your efforts to conceal these truths have prolonged suffering and sown distrust." Inspector Lestrade stepped forward, his expression grave and respectful. "The evidence presented is irrefutable."
A collective breath was released, the tension easing as the room embraced the catharsis of revelation. I observed Miss Grafton, whose eyes shimmered with tears, a mixture of sorrow for the past and hope for the future. Her steadfastness through ordeal embodied the strength required to confront the darkest of secrets. Holmes concluded with a measured solemnity. This case reminds us that shadows, whether cast by objects or by human frailty, cannot endure forever in darkness. As the assembly slowly dispersed, quiet conversations replaced the heavy silence, the bonds between them renewed by shared truth. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of Baker Street, Holmes and I reflected upon the case, the fire casting warm light as shadows softened. "Watson," Holmes said, "the greatest mysteries are not merely puzzles of fact, but of character and conscience." I nodded, the complexity of the case lingering in my thoughts. Holmes smiled faintly. Clarity is the prize of patience and observation. As the night deepened, I found solace in the knowledge that though new mysteries would surely arise, the pursuit of truth would always be met with unwavering resolve. The shadow that pointed backward had been unveiled, its secrets laid bare beneath the steady light of reason. And with that, our journey through Harberton's haunted past came to its close. For now. Chapter 17, The Final Climax, Truth Unveiled. The air in Harberton House was thick with anticipation, heavier than at any previous gathering. The great hall, once a place of whispered secrets and shadowed fears, had transformed into a solemn stage set for revelation. The gathered company, each person entwined in the web of this mystery, sat or stood with quiet restraint, faces etched with a complex blend of anxiety, relief, and the sober weight of consequence. Time itself seemed to pause, awaiting the words that would bring light to long-hidden darkness. Holmes stood at the head of the room, framed by the grand windows through which the pale dawn struggled to break. His figure was erect and commanding, a pillar of calm authority that drew the eye and stilled the breath. His gaze swept over the assembly. Miss Grafton, resolute despite the trials endured. Inspector Lestrade, a figure of steady justice. Dr. Forsyth, poised and analytical. Calloway, loyal and unwavering. And the others whose lives had become intertwined with the sinister tale of the sardonyx mirror. Even Mr. Vole, subdued but present, bore the burden of truth visibly, a man transformed by confession and consequence. The room fell into an expectant hush as Holmes's voice cut through the silence, steady, measured, and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have traveled a tortuous path, one veiled in deception, fear, and betrayal. The shadows that have haunted Harberton House are not mere phantasms, but reflections of human frailty and ambition." He gestured toward the table where the locket lay, a small, ornate object, silent witness to the unfolding drama. The sardonyx mirror was never simply an ancient artifact to be admired or coveted. It was a symbol, a vessel carrying the weight of legacy, and a guardian of secrets powerful enough to destroy reputations and lives. Holmes's gaze turned solemn as he addressed Mr. Vole directly. "Mr. Vole, your actions, though born of fear and a desire to protect your family's legacy, led you down a dark path of concealment, coercion, and silence." Vole's eyes glistened with remorse. "I sought only to preserve what little remained of honor and dignity. In hiding the truth, I believed I was sparing others pain." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Secrets held in shadow grow poisonous, infecting all they touch. He addressed the entire company with a weighty conviction. The betrayal of Edward Clavering,
The smuggling of priceless artifacts, the silencing of witnesses, the manipulation of records was an effort to rewrite history itself. Inspector Lestrade stepped forward, his voice steady and resolute. Thanks to Mr. Holmes's extraordinary deductions, the full scope of this conspiracy is now before us. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Relief, sorrow, and a dawning hope mingled among the assembled faces. Holmes's eyes softened as he regarded Miss Grafton. Your courage and determination have been a beacon in the darkness. She returned his gaze with quiet dignity. Holmes then turned to me, his voice lowered in reflection. Watson, the shadows of the past stretch long and deep, but they also illuminate the way forward. I nodded, the complex tapestry of deceit, courage, and redemption weaving itself into a coherent whole in my mind. As the sun ascended, spilling warm light across the ancient hall, a sense of peace began to settle over Hobbiton House, softening the scars left by years of secrets and lies. Holmes smiled gently.
As the company slowly dispersed, their hushed conversations carried a new tone, one of reflection and resolution. The long night of deception had passed. The shadow that had pointed backward was unmasked at last, its secrets laid bare beneath the clear light of justice and reason. Holmes and I stepped outside, breathing in the fresh morning air tinged with the scent of dew and earth. Though this chapter had closed, I knew our pursuit of truth, the eternal chase of shadows, would continue to call us forth wherever mysteries awaited. And with that certainty, I felt a profound sense of peace, tempered by the knowledge that wherever shadows fall, the light of justice must follow. Chapter 18. Holmes' Final Reflection. The long, oppressive night that had enveloped Hobbiton House and its myriad secrets finally gave way to a pale and tentative dawn. The first tentative rays of sunlight filtered through the heavy, time-worn curtains of 221B Baker Street, casting gentle beams upon the cluttered table where papers, notes, and the evidence of our prolonged investigation lay scattered. The weight of the case, the tangled web of betrayal, secrecy, and shadow, seemed to lift slightly, leaving behind a quiet residue of contemplation and relief. Holmes reclined thoughtfully in his favorite armchair, the familiar curve worn smooth by years of use. His pipe rested lightly between his fingers, smoke curling lazily into the air, weaving with the soft light that filled the room. His eyes were distant, reflective, the kind of look that follows the closing of a chapter and the settling of a tumultuous storm. The mental exertions of the case seemed to drain from him, replaced by a rare and profound stillness. I sat across from him, notebook in hand but long since set aside, unwilling to let the silence grow uncomfortable. I studied the lines of his face, the subtle indications of fatigue beneath the sharp intellect that had so often unraveled the most tangled riddles. After a long pause, Holmes's gaze lifted, and a faint smile touched his lips, a smile both knowing and serene. Watson, the matter of the Sardonyx mirror has reached its conclusion, and justice, in its careful and deliberate manner, has been meted out. I nodded, the warmth of admiration filling me anew. Once again, Holmes, you have transformed fragments and shadows into a clear and unassailable whole. Holmes exhaled slowly, the tendrils of pipe smoke trailing upward like ephemeral wisps of thought. The shadow that pointed backward, the burden we uncovered, was a weight borne by many, secrets kept in silence for too long. It is a sober reminder that the past, though vanished, never truly dies. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, voice dipping into a quiet murmur that invited reflection. Yet, Watson, the deepest mysteries are not solely external puzzles to be solved. They reside within the hidden chambers of the human heart. Encouraged, I ventured to ask, Holmes, do you believe the mirror itself held any real power? His eyes sparkled with a rare softness. Power, Watson, often lies not in objects but in perception.
The sardonyx mirror was a catalyst, a focal point around which hopes, fears, and human frailty coalesced. Rising, Holmes moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back, and gazed out at the awakening city below. London stirred slowly to life, unaware of the battles fought and truths revealed within the walls of Baker Street. The distant hum of carriage wheels, the muffled chatter of early risers, the scent of damp earth and coal fires, all filled the room with the tangible pulse of the ordinary world continuing beyond the extraordinary case. Each case, he said softly, is a single thread in the vast and intricate fabric of human experience. Some unravel quickly and cleanly, others twist and knot in ways only time can untangle. I saw in his expression the rare quiet satisfaction of a mind fulfilled, the calm after the storm of intellectual exertion. The case had tested him, demanded his every ounce of insight, and now, for a moment, he allowed himself the peace of completion. Tomorrow, he said, turning from the window, we will take up new cases, new shadows to chase, new puzzles to solve. I closed my notebook, reflecting on the journey we had shared, the mysteries confronted, the truths uncovered, and the profound bond forged between us in the relentless quest for justice. Holmes sank back into his chair, eyes closing briefly as if savoring the quiet peace that had finally descended upon us. The room glowed warmly with the last flickers of the fire, a sanctuary amidst the ceaseless noise and complexity of the world beyond. And as London awoke to a new day, I felt a deep and abiding certainty. Wherever shadows fall, the call for truth and reason endures, and Sherlock Holmes's brilliant mind will forever be ready, vigilant, unyielding, to illuminate the path for all who seek justice. The story of the sardonyx mirror was at an end, yet the eternal dance between shadow and light, mystery and revelation continues without pause, and so shall we.